Welcome, everyone, and Happy New Year. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining the first session of the year of today's Ask the Expert session. And Happy New Year to everyone. So I'm Lori Sjogren, and I'll be assisting with today's session along with my colleague, Tanoa. All right. So now please join me in welcoming back our resident ataxia expert, Dr. Susan Perlman. Dr. Perlman is a clinical professor of neurology and director of the Ataxia Center at the UCLA Medical Center in Los Angeles, California. Welcome, Dr. Perlman.
Thank you so much for inviting me back again. And the start of a new year. It's really getting kicked off in a bang. The fires here have been pretty disruptive over the last 24 hours. So, many of my patients have had to evacuate, and, it's difficult, when you're grappling with an ataxic or other motor disorder. But, we're hoping that everybody, can get through this very difficult time. So at the top of our list for 2025 is what's happening with drug development. And the first question that made it into the Q&A is, what's happening with the new drug application for troriluzole? Is it just going to be for SCA3 or will it be broader? And we, without a crystal ball, we have no idea what the FDA is going to decide about that. But I'm hoping it will be a broad indication. There is currently an expanded access program for troriluzole with any SCA diagnosis, and this is the numbered series, SCA 1, 2, 3, up to SCA 50 now. So even if your SCA was not part of the original study, if you have a genetically confirmed spinocerebellar ataxia, the numbered series, you may be able to access, in the expanded access program, troriluzole. Off-label prescriptions for unique new drugs for rare disorders, typically they will be quite expensive, and getting off-label, through your insurance company might be difficult. But regular riluzole, which is what troriluzole turns into in your system, is available even for people who do not have Lou Gehrig's disease, and it can be obtained with coupon support for relatively inexpensive access. Now we have two questions about SCA6. Sarah has indicated that her 77-year-old mother with SCA6 seems to be progressing rapidly. Do the disease symptoms eventually level off, or will her limited mobility end up with total inability to move her limbs? The progression of most of the SCAs with typical onset in adulthood is, the first 5 years, symptoms are there. They may slowly worsen. People may be on a plateau. Then they can fall off the plateau and seem to get worse over a couple of years and then level out again. So, I think depending on when this 77-year-old had her onset of symptoms, she could be at a point where she's just fallen off her plateau, and with good rehab, attention to good, health management, could stabilize for a period of time. People in the later stages of spinocerebellar ataxia may end up wheelchair dependent, may end up with a lot of difficulty with arm coordination, difficulty with speaking or swallowing. So it can appear to be total inability to move. But, typically to reach that point takes about 20 years of illness. So I'm hoping that, with good care, this woman's mother will be able to stabilize again. Rhonda, has a very concerning email that, she's right, there is no cure for any of the spinocerebellar ataxias. She has SCA6 and is falling frequently, and we have to be careful with falls. I've had patients who have fallen, have bumped their head, seem to have a rapid decline after that because they have actually developed a hematoma in the brain from the fall that may be undiagnosed for weeks or longer. So number one, you don't want to be falling. Number two, if there is a sudden change in your balance, capability, think of something else going on. Looking for online medicines, in the drug pipeline, if you go to the National Ataxia Foundation website, each of the SCAs, the common SCAs, has a pipeline showing what drugs are in development. It's a sparse field for drug development right now. So looking for things online can be problematic. There are a couple of things that people have been able to get online or through other things. Tanganil is one. Acetyl L-leucine or acetyl D-L-leucine is available in Europe. It's been used for dizziness and for balance problems. I've had people who have been able to get it from Europe. They've tried it with mixed results. Some felt it helped, some felt it didn't help. And then there's a Japanese drug, Seradist, which is really only available by going to Japan and interacting with a Japanese physician there. I would be wary of anything that you get that isn't well documented regarding purity and how it was manufactured, because as Rhonda points out, her son passed away because a friend gave him a pill that happened to be fentanyl. So you really have no idea without some of the background on things that you can get over the counter or over the internet, about how safe they really are. Mary has a question that she's also interested in troriluzole, but wants to find out if she can take modafinil while asking to be on troriluzole before it comes out. So if Mary has a SCA diagnosis that would enable her to get the expanded access troriluzole, there's no interaction with modafinil, and the side effect profile very different between the two drugs. People do take modafinil for excessive daytime fatigability, typically with a sleep disorder, but you can get it, from a coupon service like GoodRx or Mark Cuban for relatively cheap, even if you don't have a sleep disorder. And I've used it in careful doses to combat some of the fatigue that can accompany ataxia. Have I seen any patients improving on Seradist or Taltirolin? These were people who did not have thyroid disease, but were following the Japanese approval for use for ataxia and other conditions. And I've got 2 people who are continuing on it, who have been able to get it from Japan and make frequent visits back there to get refills. They feel they are stabilized. Neither one has a genetic ataxia. They both have non-genetic ataxia. And if you can get it and you want to try it for 3 months, let's say, there's no reason not to try that. Hugh has a question. My 57-year-old nephew has had genetic testing and has SCA6, but no symptoms yet. Should he take Dalfampridine now? Might it prevent or lessen symptoms? So looking at drugs that we use for symptomatic management of ataxia, regular riluzole I've already mentioned, and then troriluzole, which is in the same family. Dalfampridine is another one, which has been approved for gait disorders in multiple sclerosis and does have a track record for helping dizziness. In people who do not yet have symptoms, use of dalfampridine has not been investigated as a potential disease stalling or disease modifying drug. It seems to be purely symptomatic. So without symptoms, it's unlikely that your nephew would notice any benefit from it. Nuno has SCA3 and is taking Taltirolin. Can he take that while taking riluzole? Yes. Again, there's no interaction. Do I think Taltirolin does anything for SCA3? My experience is very limited, but the Japanese data suggests that it could be helpful. And, we would think symptomatically, but, it's possible there's a disease modifying effect as well. Mary wonders if I'm based in Minnesota or California. I'm in California, in Southern California. And, outside we have a huge cloud of smoke that's, blocking our frequent sunshine, and hopefully, things will settle down here. Mary has a question. My thoughts about mesenchymal stem cells or other types of stem cell therapy and autoimmune illnesses. Now, stem cells have been used in a variety of ways. They can be given by infusion to stimulate nerve growth factors, which could slow progression of many disorders. They've been used to carry other drugs and treatments. I'm not familiar with their use for autoimmune illnesses, where typically you use steroids, you use intravenous immunoglobulin, you use plasmapheresis or other immunosuppressant agents. So I really can't comment on that. And if Lori will keep track of the questions that I don't have answers for, I can spend some time after our session this morning looking up in the literature to see if there's something that is known. Have I ever seen regeneration of cerebellar cells? And I presume this is in the context of stem cells, or improvement in balance. I must admit, I have a small number of patients who have done stem cell therapies, one for SCA3, one for or a couple, I think, for non-genetic ataxia. I can't say that it's been helpful. When you have small numbers of patients, there could be benefits from, the placebo effect, or the excitement of being on a new treatment that might be helpful. And we do need larger controlled trials, which are in the works. There are companies that are working on developing FDA monitored stem cell trials that will hopefully give us more information about that. Can taking 4 serotonin increasing medicines together daily cause ataxia or balance problems in the elderly? More likely, it's going to cause serotonin syndrome, which can affect blood pressure. It can, really have severe side effects. And usually if you're going to be taking, 2 drugs together that can boost serotonin, you're warned about not using them together. And I would, probably recommend to, cut back and reduce to, 1 serotonin boosting drug at a time. Why do patients with ataxia lose weight? Could be several reasons. Some of the ataxias involve peripheral nerves and muscles. And if they are not functioning properly, the muscles will deteriorate, become thinner, and muscles are heavy. So you will lose weight from muscle loss. This can be seen in spinocerebellar ataxia type 3 and others where there is motor nerve and motor muscle involvement. If you're having trouble eating and you're eating less because it's harder to swallow, you're going to lose weight there. So I think those are 2 common things, that could require consultation with, a nutritionist to find ways to stall the weight loss. Make sure that you're not taking any medications that can contribute to weight loss. Then we have another question. It's cold in upstate New York. I actually come from the Albany area in my youth. And, I kind of miss the cold weather in Southern California. We have climate rather than weather most of the time. So here's a question. Undiagnosed ataxia because insurance won't cover further genetic testing. Now, I don't know what genetic testing this individual has had already. It seems to be accompanied by intractable chronic migraine. It's not episodic ataxia type 2, although that can occur with migraine as a feature of it. And they're taking acetazolamide, which seems to help the nystagmus and dizziness. Migraine specialists are at a loss to try to control the attacks of migraine, and it's not clear if there's also attacks of ataxia. Am I aware of any treatment that has helped other ataxia patients with intractable migraine? So if you're dealing with a migraine mechanism, whether it's triggered by an ataxia gene or is occurring from some other genetic or non-genetic factors, there's a whole library of migraine medicines that can be used to, block the pathways that set migraine off, to stop migraine, before it gets to a severe level. And I think you need to discuss that, with your migraine specialists. Things as simple as taking vitamin B2, riboflavin, and magnesium at bedtime can raise your threshold. And there are many other drugs that have been approved now. But the fact that you are responding to acetazolamide for the eye movement problem and dizziness does suggest a couple of things. You could have one of the episodic ataxias that's not EA2. I mean, I think they're up to EA6 now in subtypes. And more detailed genetic testing, whole exome sequencing might reveal that. On the other hand, if you have central vestibular involvement along with your ataxia, acetazolamide can stabilize the central vestibular component, which can trigger the nystagmus and dizziness. So again, this might be helpful to discuss with a dizzy specialist, an ear, nose, and throat specialist, or a neurologist who specializes in vestibular changes to find the best option. And then reading about SCA27B and headache, I think if you haven't been screened for SCA27B or for Canvas, those are the two newest genes to be discovered. You should be screened for them because there's active research going on, potentially to yield, more treatment opportunities. Here's Mary has commented that she's seen and experienced about 6 months of improvement in her ataxia symptoms with various treatments. Don't know what treatments those are. Have I ever seen a patient make much improvement? And what types of ataxia or treatments might have done that? Rehab always helps. Physical therapy with a good exercise program, vestibular rehab can definitely help. If you have other symptoms that might be amenable to treatment, some ataxias have muscle tightness and muscle spasm, which can be directly treated. Again, if there's inner ear connectivity problems, that can usually be treated. If there's an autoimmune or inflammatory component, that can be treated. So I think it's important to really look at the various parts of this elephant to see what you can initiate that might help your symptoms and stabilize you for a period of time. Alan has a question. Has Ampera been found to be helpful for SCA and unspecified for balance and speech? And the Ampera is Dalfampridine, which is approved for MS. It was originally in use as 4-aminopyridine, a compounded agent for spinal cord injury because it improves conduction along spinal pathways and nerve pathways in general. So I'm thinking, any disorder that, number one, has upper motor neuron features or spinal cord involvement, or, with the cerebellar vestibular changes, genetic or non-genetic, should try dalfampridine. And I do use it wisely in my ataxia patients. I may try other things first, but ultimately, for many of them, I will come to riluzole or dalfampridine or amantadine, which is an older drug. Now, Efrat has a question. Is CEO of an Israeli Machado Joseph's organization, heard about the success of troriluzole, and is obviously very excited about this, and hoping that they'll be able to get it in the expanded access program, or ultimately, if it gets approved. The son has SCA3, takes troriluzole, 50 milligrams twice a day. And that is, I think they mean riluzole, 50 milligrams twice a day. Given that troriluzole turns into riluzole, it just, the troriluzole formulation gives you more even blood levels, but the end result could be the same. So at this point, I would not change from riluzole to troriluzole, but let's wait and see what the FDA will do and the international drug communities will do. So here's, Tammy has an interesting link. This company has been helping people with ALS regain function. Can I look at their products and see what would be helpful for ataxia? And again, Lori, if you can mark down this link, I will check it later and see what I can do. Clark has a question. Is there any medication that can treat ataxia the way that Copaxone treats MS? So Copaxone, MS is an immune-mediated disorder. The immune system is making antibodies that attack the myelin around the nerves, giving the symptoms, the relapses and remissions of multiple sclerosis. Copaxone interrupts that immune attack, so that if you have bad antibodies, as it were, that are contributing to your cerebellar ataxia, there are immune targeting drugs, and it tends to be not the same ones that are used for MS that could be helpful. So I would make sure that you've been evaluated for an immune component. and then pursue what you can to interrupt that. Why do patients always have cold feet? So if your ataxia has a component that affects peripheral nerves, causing numbness, altering circulation, or even altering motor function in, feet or legs, for instance, the small blood vessels that bring blood to the surface, to the skin, may be incoordinated, as it were. They may be weakened and not functioning well. And so you would be prone to develop cold feet, blotchy feet, bluish, purplish feet, commonly seen in Friedreich's ataxia and possibly others as well. Now, here's an anonymous. In the UK, researchers are looking at a sample of 3,000 ataxia patients that they believe have gluten ataxia as the single largest cause of ataxia. And gluten ataxia has been intensively investigated in the UK. They have a fantastic research group there. UK patients are regularly tested for the antibodies that can be involved in gluten, antibody production. And they have a test that costs less than $100. Why is there no counterpart to this research in the US? We can test for the gluten antibodies and gluten antibody genetic profiles. And people with, gluten ataxia may also have, systemic problems with, with gluten antibodies, and of course, peripheral neuropathy can be involved in GI tract issues as well. So we can order these tests, and most ataxia patients in the US will have screening for bad antibodies, which includes gluten antibodies. Tony has a question. What is the current status of FDA approval for troriluzole? Well, we don't know. It's in the process of being submitted as a new drug application. The FDA will be looking at it. And like I say, you really need a crystal ball to determine, if they're going to, recognize that it does have benefits and should be approved in, ataxia, an area with a huge unmet need. But I think we'll know more in the next couple of months. Jenny has a question. Am I aware of ataxia patients who've developed GI motility disorders related to the vagus nerve, like gastroparesis, which can be seen in Parkinson's and in multiple sclerosis? I have seen some patients who have autonomic neuropathy associated with their ataxia, where they may have problems with controlling their blood pressure, which relies on autonomic nerves. Autonomic nerves drive the GI tract and, controlling, constipation and also gastroparesis. If you happen to have diabetes, gastroparesis is very common in diabetes. So that there are a variety of things that could contribute to it. But this, Jenny indicates that she developed gastroparesis roughly a year and a half after her first ataxia symptoms, with no other cause being found. So I would want to know, if you have an autonomic neuropathy, and hopefully they are pursuing treatment for your gastroparesis, even though they haven't found the cause yet. Okay, anonymous. I suffer with head tremors, possibly going on propranolol. Good place to start. There are many drugs that are approved for tremor. Tremor, whether it's head tremors, hand tremors, core tremors, are commonly seen in ataxia. The tremor pathway has a loop that goes through the cerebellum, and there's a large library of drugs that are used for tremor. Propranolol is usually one that is started unless you have, a reason not to try it, like low blood pressure or asthma. Many of my family members have been diagnosed with SCA4. What do I know about SCA4? I live near UCLA. Would UCLA be a good place to establish with a neurologist? Also has severe GI issues. Could SCA4 be the cause? SCA4 has been around for a long time in the numbered series. It was, reported shortly after SCA3, which was, like 20 years ago. The Swedish research group has found, a better, way to define it, to, try to figure out its underlying genetic cause. So I don't know that there is a specific treatment available yet. The treatment is going to be, very broad, as we've already discussed. If you, live near UCLA, it would be great to see somebody here in our ataxia team, since SCA4 is fairly rare. And I wonder if any of your family members, who may live in Southern California have been seen by our ataxia research team. So please contact us, and let's see what we might add to your ataxia journey. Another anonymous, is there a treatment for severe contractions in end-stage ataxia type 8? And I presume you mean muscle contractions or spasms. And, the typical drugs used, baclofen, tizanidine is used, Flexeril is used. You can use Botox injections to relax those pathways so they won't contract so strongly. So hopefully you are seeing a neurologist who can help you with, these medication trials. So Duke or Beverly has had 2 genetic tests, both negative. How do I find out how I got ataxia? Okay, depends on what those genetic tests were. Were they comprehensive? There are rarer forms of ataxia that may not have been covered by that. On the other hand, with a good, negative broad genetic profile, you would think more about acquired factors. And, non-genetic ataxia is, at least as far as we understand. So I'm hoping that your doctor who ordered the genetic testing will be able to make sure you've been properly screened for all the non-genetic causes. Larry mentions, am I familiar using Dalfampridine off-label to improve balance? Yes. It's, the second drug I go to. It's, particularly useful in somebody who may have dizziness as part of their ataxia, because it can help the dizziness, while riluzole can make the dizziness worse. Tammy says, my family has a dominantly inherited adult form of ataxia, and all efforts to get a genetic diagnosis have failed. Includes complete genome, exome, mitochondrial additions, deletions. I hope that you have banked your family DNA with the National DNA Research Group that is looking for new genes all the time. And the National Ataxia Foundation can help you contact one of the centers that's involved in this research project, which can then make sure that you can mail in a DNA sample and hopefully be added to successfully finding out your diagnosis. Another anonymous question about photobiomodulation or biomutation, mulation, not sure what that is. But again, if Lori will make note of this, I will look it up and get back to you. Is there a medicine to improve body balance in patients with ataxia? We've already mentioned a couple. Physical therapy, a non-drug way to improve, balance and coordination. Riluzole, Dalfampridine, amantadine are traditionally used drugs to help balance. Okay, Nuno, again, has SCA3, is taking taltyrolene. Can they take that while taking riluzole? Yes. So, and I think, in the Japanese study, SCA3 is seen over there, and I think they were part of the taltyrolene research program a number of years ago when it was started. Greg has SCA27B. Do I have any experience with a combination of dalfampridine and clonazepam? I do have patients who are taking both. They take clonazepam typically at night to reduce nighttime leg spasms. They take dalfampridine, as prescribed, during the day. Clonazepam can also be used independently for tremor at low or modest doses. And again, you would have to ask your prescribing physician about, any overlap of side effects, but I'm not aware that there's an overlap of side effects. So, but each of these drugs have potential side effects. So, you want to be sure that you were using a dose that was being supervised. T. Goslin asks, are you aware of any evidence that links functional neurologic disorder therapy to the treatment of ataxia? If so, can I share my impression of this therapeutic approach? Not sure what you mean about functional neurologic disorder therapy. There are functional doctors who treat metabolism, who treat a variety of things that relate to bodily function. But when we talk about functional neurologic disorders, it's where your reaction to a neurologic disorder or to a symptom amplifies the symptom. You have a certain symptom, you are very anxious about it. The more anxious you get, the worse the symptom is. So that we sometimes see a diagnosis of functional neurologic disorder that can often be interpreted as the patient has no problems, they're making it up. Not true. But if there is, and I hope this is the core of your question, if there is a functional overlay where your reaction to the symptom you're having, ataxia or other symptoms, is making the symptom worse, then any therapy that's going to divorce your reaction from the actual underlying hardwired problem will be helpful. And that's about as much as I can say about that. Josephine, somebody mentioned that ataxia may also come from a back injury. The symptom of ataxia, imbalance, can be triggered or observed in people that have, back problems where they've got pinched nerves that are altering, nerve function, causing pain or muscle weakness in their lower body, and they can have a gait instability that looks like ataxia. But true ataxia from the cerebellar and spinocerebellar pathways, you probably would not come from a back injury, although if you already have an ataxic disorder and you have a back injury, it can make the ataxic symptoms worse because you're weaker, you're stiffer, you're in pain. Marius has a question. I'm interested in cerebellar neuroplasticity. Any progress to improve it, especially at the age of 64? So we know that in the cerebellum, in the brain in general, we still have stem cells left over from when we were born that have not differentiated into any particular cell type or cell pathway. And recovery after a stroke is felt to result from the remaining nerves just growing new branches to take over and improve symptoms. But there's also a thought that those internal stem cells that we have, these baby stem cells in our brain, could be activated by nerve growth factors or other treatments. And I know that there are treatments in development to stimulate nerve growth factors, with stem cells as one, and there are others as well that could be helpful at any age. But these treatments are very early development stages and are not widely being done. Anna Maria, anything to be done to improve the neuroplasticity of the cerebellum? One thing that will improve natural nerve growth factors is exercise. So something cardio will stimulate nerve growth factors in the brain, which may help with neuroplasticity, which is a fascinating area and an area that I probably should do more reading in as well. Tony has a question. What is the process for the right to try application? Now, I was asked this question by another individual and looked it up online, went to the FDA website, found out about right to try. Basically, it's an agreement between the company that has a drug that's not yet approved, but they feel comfortable enough with its safety that they are willing to provide the drug to an individual with a disorder who has exhausted other treatment options, really nothing else they could be doing. And on the patient side, they have to work with a doctor who will get usually permission from a consent form from their investigational review board at their institution that will allow them to take an unapproved drug with some safety profile and give it to an individual. So it starts with your treating doctor, who contacts the company, seeing if the company is willing to dispense drug in right to try, and then they work with their own institutional review board to get appropriate safeguards in place. The thing about right to try is it avoids the FDA. But through the FDA, you can also get single subject approval, which means a loop through the FDA, working with the drug company, getting an application into the FDA to try it in one subject with approval from your institutional review board. So there is a structure to do it. Right to try regulations are different from state to state. So there's no one protocol for what's going to be required. And I see that, it would be helpful to work with your treating physician to work out those details. Mary has a question. Is the progression I just described similar for STUB1? Okay. My sister is 51 and has had some progression of symptoms in the past 3 to 4 years. I'm going to have to look up the details of stub 1. I do not myself have any patients with that diagnosis that I'm aware of. So I'm going to have Lori keep track of this question so I can get back to you. And Shannon also has a question about ARCA3. In terms of research, is there hope for a recessive scar? Absolutely. The Ataxia Global Initiative, which is based in Europe and includes sites in North America, has a whole program devoted to the recessive ataxias, looking for better ways to define them, better ways to look at underlying mechanisms, and better ways to bring in potential disease-modifying therapies. So it's progressing not as quickly as the dominant ataxias, but I think we will see progress in the upcoming year. Jenny, it's frustrating that insurance won't pay for genetic testing for ataxia when there's drugs like troriluzole coming down the pipeline. I think if troriluzole is approved for SCA in general, it will probably be easier to get genetic testing for SCA, the tests that are available, because there is a treatment available, we hope. Is there any hope that insurance companies can be forced to pay for testing due to these new drug developments? It's interesting. When the first approved drug for Huntington's disease came out, the company that was, that had that drug was paying for genetic testing. Currently, there are ways to, potentially get, subsidized or free genetic testing. Whether insurance companies will be forced to pay, unlikely. You can't really force insurance companies to do anything, but it may be a patient assistance program that they will offer, and it's something that we can certainly encourage them to do. And the National Ataxia Foundation has been a strong proponent of getting genetic testing available for all people to help better define their future steps. Colleen says, I have SCA5B and central sleep apnea. Well, SCA is cerebellar based. Central sleep apnea is felt to be brainstem based. The sleep regulating triggering center is in the brainstem, and it can be responsible for central apneas where your brain forgets to tell you to breathe. Also, it can be part of the control for obstructive sleep apnea. So, central sleep apnea as a component of any of the SCAs, it should have further research, and we are doing, data collection and research in all the sleep disorders that can be problematic in SCA. And then Shannon has a question, do I recommend a neuro who knows about ARCA3? I'm going to have to look that up. Lori, write this down. Jacqueline says, I have Canvas. A lot of research going on, but most of the treatment is still, very much rehab-based and then symptomatic, as I've mentioned before. Joel says, my neurologist suggests a CT scan of internal organs plus a spinal tap to determine if there may be a tumor. I am 84, diagnosed less than a year ago. No family indication of SCA. So tests have any value. First of all, even though there's no family history of SCA, 5% of people have, may have a genetic ataxia that, just hasn't appeared in prior generations. Some ataxias are noted to be late onset in life, so that, SCA6 can be very late onset, SCA2 can be very late onset, Canvas can be very late onset, SCA27B can be late onset as well, and there are others. So even if you are, over the age of 70, genetic testing may be appropriate. But after the age of 70, non-genetic ataxias are much more common, and the most treatable forms are the ones that are due to bad antibodies produced by a hidden tumor. So if you have had ataxia and they've not found any other more common cause, a vitamin deficiency, an orthopedic issue, an inner ear or vision issue, then working you up for a small hidden cancer is a good idea because that is treatable. April says, I have SCA34. Are there any things I can do to slow my symptoms? I have read that gluten-free diets help with symptoms. What supplements are beneficial? I do yoga twice a week. Should I increase it or incorporate other exercise? So let's work backwards. Exercise always helps. It can improve symptoms and stabilize for a period of time. You should focus on core exercise, yoga, or other balance or coordination exercises. If you have muscle tightness, you should incorporate stretching as well. And those are the three primary types of exercise that are helpful. Cardio is helpful. It can increase nerve growth factors in the brain. So if you want to add some cardio, that can also be, a four-pronged approach. Supplements. There are no supplements that have been proven to be helpful in slowing progression of genetic ataxia. But if you wanted to look at antioxidant, anti-aging supplements, vitamin E, CoQ10, and fish oil tend to be at the top of the list. So if you wanted to start with, vitamin E and CoQ10 to see if it is helpful, may be helpful for fatigue, if that accompanies your ataxia. But, pretty much, anti-aging vitamins that have some proof research behind them could be helpful in slowing progression of the adult ataxias, which seem to somehow be related to aging-related pathways. Gluten-free diets, if you have gluten ataxia, obviously a gluten-free diet can help with your ataxia and other gluten-related symptoms. But a damaged cerebellum produces gluten antibodies. There's a cross-reaction of antibodies. And the presence of gluten antibodies, obviously can cause more damage, cross-reacting with those cerebellar proteins. So reducing gluten in your diet could potentially reduce some of that bad antibody interaction. Also, if you avoid gluten, you're probably going to be avoiding things that, have, white flour, flour in general. And that could help fatigue. White sugar, white flour tend to increase fatigue, which can be a complication of ataxia. So a gluten-free diet can actually indirectly help, with symptoms of fatigue, can help with weight loss to some extent if weight is an issue. Tony, can a list of the multi-syllable drug names beneficial for SCA sent to webinar attendees? Aren't they on the NAF website information sheets for treatment? I pretty much know that riluzole, dalfampridine, amantadine, and others are on that NAF drug list, things you can do that can help symptoms. And I think, they can make that available to you. Anna Maria, NGS results in a variant of okay, so this is genetic screening has shown a variant of unknown significance in, I think, the ataxin-1 gene. What is best to do, genetic testing or whole genome sequencing? Currently, a variant of unknown significance in a known ataxia gene might turn out to have significance. If enough people are found with that same variant and they all have ataxia, it could be a new genetic, change in a known ataxia gene that could be now included in mutations that are becoming significant. To confirm that, whole genome sequencing is recommended if you haven't had that done. So it sounds like you've had whole exome sequencing, which showed this small change in that gene. Specific genetic testing for other changes in that gene might be helpful. Whole genome sequencing could also cover a broader area, and that's what our genetic group recommends here. Adam, is there free testing for family members to see if they have the gene? I have SCA28. It is rare, so it would be good to get the count up. Free genetic testing. The National Ataxia Foundation has had a program, but it is a restricted program and doesn't include SCA28. So that, you might want to have your genetic counselor or your neurologist look around for the least expensive way to get testing for that particular gene. A single gene test could be as inexpensive, relatively speaking, as $300. So it's something that, could be explored. Um, Marianka, are there any new drugs for autoimmune cerebellar ataxia besides rituximab? Tried IVIG and steroids without success. Plasmapheresis is another option. Rituxan is the most commonly used one now. There are others, however, that are immunosuppressants, but not as selective as Rituxan. So Rituxan does tend to be the best tolerated with the least risk. And you don't indicate that you've tried it yet, but I think if you do have an autoimmune ataxia, it's worth negotiating a trial. Susan mentions my husband takes Dalfampridine for SCA27B, and it helps his speech. And Dalfampridine is noted to be very helpful for SCA27B. Not clear why, but it does seem to have a very good response for speech, for coordination, and for balance. What drug should he take to slow progression or help his walking disability? So if you haven't had benefit for balance or walking with Dalfampridine, and I presume you're taking the prescribed dose, you could add riluzole to it. You could add amantadine to it for symptomatic benefit for walking. But to slow progression, again, they're working on disease-modifying therapies. There's one that I'm aware of that's being developed for a different form of ataxia that could be helpful for SCA27B, and we'll have to wait and see where that goes. And now here's a question. My brother has ataxia AT. He is 11 years old and now has difficulty walking. We are afraid the situation will worsen. What do you recommend to us? What should we do? Is there a solution? There's currently a treatment trial of a steroid that can be given in micro doses via blood infusion that seems to be helpful for the younger patients with ataxia telangiectasia. The trial that's going on is looking at patients from age 6 to age 9 or age 10. But depending on the country that you are in, you might be able to get him in that trial even though he's 11. Now, there's another trial that is going on from IntraBio on acetyl L-leucine, or Tanganil is the less refined version of that, that has been found to have some benefit. It's been approved for Niemann-Pick type C. It's been investigated in late onset Tay-Sachs and also in AT, and there's a trial starting up with that. But the less refined version, Tanganil, is available. And I think amantadine could be safely used in an 11-year-old and might help, difficulty with walking now, but won't, modify any progression in the future. So I hope that your brother or your family has been involved with an AT center that is, up to date with all of these research opportunities. Frederick has a question about Lyme disease to encephalitis to cerebral ataxia. We know that there can be chronic Lyme disease. Lyme disease is treatable. It can affect the brain. It may, cause an ataxic illness or other encephalitic symptom, and treatment should be pursued. Anonymous attendee, any new promising trial drugs for MSA? How hard to get right to try? Okay, so the companies that are researching drugs for MSA, Lundbeck, is going into a phase 3 for their drug that blocks the alpha-synuclein buildup in MSA. Ono has finished their phase 2 trial and is going to be, looking at, hopefully long-term data analysis. They may come back with a phase 3 trial at some point, again, targeting alpha-synuclein. Teva is starting a trial, but it's looking for people in the early stages of MSA who are still ambulatory, maybe using only a cane. And the Yoda company in Japan is going to be starting an early phase 1-2 trial for MSA. so that there are a number of companies interested in drugs that can combat neural inflammation, drugs that can reduce the buildup of the toxic alpha-synuclein in the cells that surround the ataxia nerves. Right to try, you have to approach each company separately. And I don't know off the top of my head which companies have right to try capability. They could have concerns about liability in an unproven drug. Perry, I have MSAC living in Israel. Is anything new in the pipeline? Any ideas to slow progression? And I just mentioned, the current drugs that are in active research. Christy, what medications would I recommend for a person of unknown type of SCA who has severe balance issues? A good physical therapy home exercise program, number one, very important. A trial of riluzole, a trial of dalfampridine, a trial of amantadine. So there are several things you could try, even with an unknown genetic or non-genetic ataxia. Vanessa, is mast cell activation syndrome common in SCA3 or other SCAs? I don't know. I have one patient with mast cell activation syndrome who has a genetic disorder unrelated to her mast cell problem and doesn't cause ataxia in her case. So I don't know that it is common in the SCAs. The natural history study that the National Ataxia Foundation has been funding for research into SCAs could be collecting that data, or they may be able to post questions to other SCA patients who are members of the National Ataxia Foundation to ask who else might have this syndrome. Michelle, my husband has SCA3, was prescribed Trimodone for tremors, but it made his balance worse. Yes, Trimodone is related to phenobarbital, so it could absolutely make you feel drugged or off balance. Are there other medications for tremors that do not have side effects that affect balance or movement? Propranolol can be used for tremor, but it may contribute to fatigue. There are other drugs distantly related to primidone that are used for tremor. Low-dose clonazepam, which can cause drowsiness or fatigue. Levetiracetam is used. There are several of the newer anti-seizure drugs that have some benefit for tremor if used carefully. Amantadine, a very old drug for ataxia, can be helpful for tremor as well, and may help balance too. So again, there's a list of these drugs on the National Ataxia Foundation website, and you can discuss them with your physician. Renu, do I know of any side effects of troriluzole? Can cause fatigue, can cause dizziness. Some people get an upset stomach. The side effect symptoms are typically mild and may go away with use. So I think, it's worth, trying it out. And if you have bothersome side effects that are worse than your ataxia symptoms, obviously stop taking it. I don't think I have ever seen anybody who was allergic to troriluzole. But you always have to be wary that you could be allergic. And there apparently are people who are allergic to dalfampridine and are unable to take it. So Terry, recently diagnosed with SCA27B, has been taking dalfampridine for 2 months, greatly helpful for symptoms. Only side effect is insomnia. I hesitate to take anything to help me sleep that would cause me to fall or become dizzy. Low-dose melatonin might help. And at low dose, you shouldn't feel groggy or hungover the next day. Most other sleep agents do have a risk of making you feel groggy or offset. If you have to get up in the middle of the night and you're dizzy from your sleep medicine, not good. So maybe low-dose melatonin would be a place to start. Pamela, I'm curious how common it is that thyroid cancer or hyperparathyroidism is a known cause of ataxia neuropathy or other neurologic diseases. I'm going to have to look that up. I know that thyroid disease, with too much thyroid or not enough thyroid, can contribute to tremor or ataxia. But thyroid cancer, if it's making a bad antibody that's attacking the cerebellum, could cause an autoimmune ataxia. Hyperparathyroidism, I don't know. So if Lori will keep track of that question, I will look it up and see if I can get back to you with an answer. And I think we have time for one more question. Virgilio, what's your recommend to increase muscle volume of the body? If your muscles are thinning, muscles thinning because of ataxia, exercise to strengthen muscles can increase muscle bulk, even if the disease itself is working against you to try to thin out your muscles. Exercise always helps. Some people take creatine or protein supplements prior to exercise, and they're safe and worth exploring. And maybe one more question from Angela. If I had any thoughts about medication for nystagmus. Oh, long list on the National Ataxia Foundation website. Drugs used for nystagmus and dizziness, which can make your balance worse when walking. And this person has SCA6, taking gabapentin, which is on the list of drugs that we try for this. Dalfampridine, reasonable to try. And I think we're going to have to stop now. It's a couple of minutes after. And I know we still have a lot of questions, and I apologize that we can't get to them all. But some of them look like I've already answered them. So hopefully, you've gotten some benefit from our discussion today.
So many good questions that you answered today, Dr. Perlman. Thank you so much.
And Lori, you're going to get back to me about, the ones that I couldn't answer, and I promise to look up. I do.
Yes, I took note of all of those. So I will email you with that as a follow-up. But yeah, your expertise and time is always so appreciated. Just so many. We have so many folks that have joined us for today's session. And just to let everyone know, a recording of today's session will become available soon. So look for that on NAF's website, on NAF's YouTube. Hope to see so many of you back for our next session later on this year. But as Dr. Perlman mentioned, that is all we have time for today. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. And thank you, Dr. Perlman. Take care, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye.